Okay, so let us begin. It's recording all good. So we start. Yeah. Today's podcast, I will tell you off the bat that I'm quite excited about and I'm quite nervous too. Mae Thomas is a veteran podcaster from India who has been hosting shows for nearly 5 years. She now has a boutique podcast company with 3 shows under her belt, one of which is India's first indie music podcast called wait for it, Made in India, and that's Made with MAED. May has a portfolio of creative work across roles in media, journalism, to being a creative director at the top podcast network in India. Today, as I sit with May at her office in Pali Village, Mumbai, I'm excited to learn from her journey and get a picture of the hustle as I venture into podcasting myself. So, how are you, May?
I'm good. I'm glad you said it was hustle because it really is.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to find out about that because what I saw on your own Made in India podcast is that you guys do such amazing videos and all in addition to this audio.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it is a lot of work, right?
It's a lot. I mean, especially when I started with Made in India, mainly it was about the podcast. But to be honest, video is such an important part of it because when you're watching musicians perform, it's such an easy thing to be mesmerized by. And so I'm so lucky that I work with good people, which is why the videos look amazing. If you can believe all the videos, fancy videos that you see is literally one guy with a camera.
Wow.
That's all. And
Yeah.
it's that good. And that's what I mean by just working with good people. It makes a huge difference.
Also, a very good camera, I think.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think the cameraman also
Okay, yeah,
is
right.
a way in which if you have a whole band set up, that's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of podcasts, they're missing the opportunity with video because you just can't distribute on YouTube and like all these other platforms, which is possible if you just hit record while you're doing the same thing anyway, right?
that's true.
What do you think?
So my thing is that I think with audio podcasts, there's so many avenues in which you can listen to it, and it more and more now, whether it's Apple or Google or Stitcher or Spotify.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because the recent Google podcasts, you now can search for a podcast and listen to it
Yeah.
via the search result, which is tech-wise, it's a really big leap and
True.
forward, at least for podcasting.
Yeah.
I think that putting up a video of like a podcast, it depends. Like I do it with my music show because, I mean, a gal on drums and a guy on guitar, like they're always gonna look so cool. So visually, it's really appealing because you're watching music being performed. But I would always, putting a whole 1 hour show up, I don't know how visually appealing it is. I think because people are doing so many snazzy things on video right now. I feel like
Yeah.
just two people on a mic,
Right.
nothing against you, no offense.
No,
But it's
that is
not
fine, yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, you're watching something. Like I know someone like Joe Rogan does it, but they're just snippets of the show.
We're on the same category there, Joe Rogan and me. Kidding. Yeah.
So I think, but we're just putting out snippets of it, right? It's not like a whole chunk of Joe Rogan's 3-hour show,
Yeah.
which it is.
Yeah.
He's just putting small chunks of it. They might be 4 minutes, might be 10 minutes. So I'm okay if you're putting video content up like that. A lot of people just put up a photo and just the audio.
Right.
I think most people are just trying to find a way to put their podcast out on as many platforms as
Right.
possible and make it as accessible as possible.
See, why I ask is because I completely understand that people wouldn't want to do it because within podcasting itself, there's already the reservation of how you look and all this gone, what are you wearing and all that. And it is
Very
great to
much.
have that feeling while you record. And video, if you add video to it, there's so much additional work. Like I've noticed that just syncing the audio and the video is, now I know it's a button in Adobe Premiere, but it is work. But what I thought is that in terms of distribution, right, and discoverability, that is a challenge, I think, to
Yeah.
find a particular podcast on a topic and things like that. It's going to be difficult. Whereas on YouTube and things like that, there's an audience who's just watching and who's not listening to podcasts. So over there, I thought there is an
That's
opportunity
actually
missed.
a really interesting point because I think there's a lot that's changing within apps that their algorithms, their recommendations, they're not as, how do I say this? It's not as good as algorithm, Spotify's algorithm for their music discovery, right? I think podcast discovery algorithms are people are working on it, but it isn't at like a level that you would see right now. I think one of the things that you're able to now search for are specific episodes that you're going to be. So in a podcast recommendation, if you're listening to say a Made in India episode with I did an interview with Apache Indian, and then maybe he did an interview with someone else on some other podcast, like maybe Bobby Friction's podcast or something. And I think that if you see one episode, like now instead of giving you show recommendations, they'll start giving you episodic recommendations, which I think is really cool. So I think that technology needs to get there, the algorithms need to get there, but I agree with you. I think it's going to be really fascinating when you see how podcasts and the apps and the way they're constructed to actually recommend stuff for you. Things like, how you have like curated playlists, of music. I think the same thing might be happening with podcasts.
With addition of these like Alexa and all these, the game changes altogether with so much focus and money on audio. Sure. Okay, all right. Now let's talk about you. Like that's what we're here for. So I want to find out, like you're one of the earliest podcasters in India. Do you know which number you are? You started in Jan 2015, if I'm not wrong, right?
Oh my God, yeah. So I know that as a music podcast, I'm always somewhere in the top 10, but it's not.
No, I mean what I mean is number as in the second podcast, the 15th podcast from India.
I think I'm the first. I mean, indie music podcast for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I don't know anything before this, and I don't think there's anyone doing what I do as an independent music show in India, because I'm actually. What was the most important thing was I felt like FM radio. I'm not talking about digital radio.
Okay.
I felt like independent artists didn't have a chance to actually put their music out there unless you were sort of relegated to some midnight hour on a Thursday night or something. And artists don't really have a chance to do studio sessions, because a lot of the radio station studios aren't all completely built to be able to have two guitarists and a vocalist or a drummer. And so a lot of the radio studios are so limited. I wanted to be able to change that around and use podcasting as a way to do live sessions with artists. So with music specifically, because I'm a real stickler for audio, I wanted to make sure that all the music that's there on my show, because I'm getting these artists to come in and perform, it was really important to me that the music was mixed and mastered and put together really, really well. So they're album quality music. I'm also working with a studio.
Yeah, on every episode, right?
Yeah, on every episode. I'm literally
crazy.
releasing.
As I listened, I was like, wow, what is going on here? Pakshi, I listened to this episode called Pakshi.
Awesome?
Wow. The music was amazing. Yeah.
So all that music, I mean, it sounds very different when you're recording it. So those are balanced, they're mixed, they're mastered by specific engineers that I work with. So it was really important that I treated that music very preciously. And I've been lucky because I have great relationships with so many musicians that they perform some of their unreleased music on the show.
Okay.
And I think at least 70 to 80% of the music on the show hasn't been played anywhere else before. So I'm super lucky. So a lot of the music that you're listening to might not even be out yet. And that for me is makes me feel like I'm not just a purveyor, but I'm also protecting the music that's there on the show. So
that's quite noble. But as I understand, you also went all in, right, on podcasting back then when you started.
When I started out, I just left radio. It was about a month into me having left radio. I hadn't completely left. I was still freelancing with Radio 1 at the time. And
that's
during
in Mumbai,
that time,
right?
Yeah, Radio 94.3. And so I used to do their afternoon request show, and before that I was their weekend jock. And so when I quit, I was still part-time with them here and there, I covered for jocks that were on leave. And then Amit Doshi approached me and said, let's, him and at that time
Cyrus?
Yeah, no, not Cyrus. So actually, Amit told me this story. This is so strange of how I ended up. They ended up talking to me. What happened was Cyrus needed a co-host, someone.
So Amit, by the way, is the founder of IVM podcast, which hosts 100 podcasts and all serious business. Yeah, tell me.
So he had told me that Cyrus wanted not a co-host, but just someone he could bounce, because it's his show, but he wants someone he can bounce off ideas with.
Okay.
And so what happened was I met Cyrus when I was at Radio 1. Like, there's a glass screen between studios, and I saw him, and I was a huge fan of his in the 90s. I had a massive crush on him. I thought he was amazing.
Okay.
One of the funniest people.
Yeah.
And then I met him, and then he came and he sat with me in the studio. He's like, hey, can I sit down? I was like, hey, do you mind talking on air? And he was like, yeah, sure. And we chatted, and I embarrassed him, and it was amazing. And then when they were trying to figure out who should be this kind of co-host, it was originally Chavi, Sachdev, and Amit. They approached me because Cyrus recommended me, saying, hey, there's this girl who's on radio, like, her name's Mae, you should totally get her on. And I was like, wow, that's insane that Cyrus recommended me. And then that's how they approached me, and they asked me if I wanted to make a show, because they knew that I was also like
Just
an
like
ex-RJ.
to touch on that, like you and Cyrus, I've listened to a few episodes. You guys have some serious chemistry going on in the show.
Cyrus is so funny,
He's the
and also he's
funniest.
the toughest man to keep up with. Like, he really keeps you on your toes. You're like, I am
Like in
never
terms
gonna
of
win.
what?
Just talking.
okay,
Like,
yeah.
you barely get a word in edgewise. And then he's also such an intelligent person.
Yeah.
Just the links in
Yeah.
his brain are so strong.
I
It
mean,
is
so casually he pulls off these remarks, which are actually quite
he
deep.
start-
He might talk about history, he might talk about society or what.
And Aryabhatta and like all kinds of
But
stuff.
then in the
Like,
most
it's insane.
ridiculously funny ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, that is so challenging, because then I always feel so dumb, like, when I'm in the show, because he's just like this fountain of knowledge, and he's not only informative, but he's also being super entertaining. And some of his jokes are like, it takes you a little while. You're like, oh wait, that was an amazing joke. And that's why the connections in his brain are awesome.
By the way, like, if you guys want to check it out, search for Mae Thomas on Google Podcasts or any podcast, and you'll find these episodes with Cyrus on
Yeah,
Cyrus Says.
you will.
You'll check it out.
So
Yeah.
then I had two ideas, actually. I wanted to do, because I used to do, when I was working at a community radio station in the UK, besides being their news editor, I did like a film show with someone who worked at the station. And so I thought I either do it like an indie music show or a film show, but I was more curious about doing an indie music show because I had more contacts. And then, yeah, that's how I started doing Made in India. And
Okay. So actually you
that's
got into podcasting through like IVM and through Amit and all that, and then it was for something else, for a different role, and then you came about
so
owning
it
your
was
own
Chavi that
podcast.
said, would you like to do a show? And that's when I met Amit. And even the name Made in India has a really interesting story. So I used to do a request show on the radio.
Okay.
And I remember whenever someone started this hashtag, so if I played someone's request on the radio, they created this hashtag called #MadeMyDay.
Okay.
And I told them about that, and that's why it's called Made in India, because one wonderful person in the Twitterverse said #MadeMyDay.
That is a nice
spelled
name,
MAED.
actually.
And I was like, what? That's crazy. It was so cool.
Yeah.
And so that's how Made in India, the name, came about. And then that's when I started bringing artists into the studio. I was doing it for about 8 to 9 months before Amit hired me as the creative director. And then that's how I was with them for about 2 years, and I actually left 2 years ago.
Okay. And how was that, your early days in podcasting? Like, and what was your role? Apart from hosting, would you also do other stuff?
Yeah, so I became the creative director of IVM. So the idea was that I was supposed to build their portfolio shows under various verticals, which could mean public policy or comedy or...
Back then there were how many?
Oh my God, when Amit started out, it was just Cyrus and me. We were the only shows, and I think there was one
It
called
was
Tall
quite
Tales.
long back
but,
as well.
Yeah. There was another one called Tall Tales, but that, I think it just had a very short stint.
Okay.
And then, the Geek Fruit guys came on. We had like the Daily Pow. And so there were so many other shows. Amit Varma's The Seen, The Unseen. And so we all worked on that. And it was exciting because, my job was also not just to make sure that we built our portfolio of shows. My job was also to make sure that the format of the show or the sound design or the way the show was created would make sense as a show.
Yeah.
So I worked with format, I worked with ideas. So it was really fun. Like I really enjoyed to some extent what we were building in this sort of podcast.
It sounds
universe
like
in
a
India,
fun project. No, but I want to understand, like, what were your skills back then, like, to be creating all of these? Like, was it in audio engineering or what was that?
So
I know that
actually,
yeah.
I don't come from an audio engineering background at all. Unlike someone like my brother who used to do like sound design for films, and he actually joined the company too because we
Okay.
needed to be able to have someone who had that kind of knowledge as well to be able to work on shows. I come from a radio background.
Okay.
I have worked in radio since I was like 18 or something. And whether it was my college radio, whether I was working for that community radio station in the UK, wherever I was, I had this like real affinity for radio. And so
Okay.
I've edited like audio, so I know what that process
So
is
probably
like, and
like putting across your personality on audio, that could be your skill that
kind of.
got.
I mean, it was more about, I mean, you can have ideas in your head. I think sometimes when you visualize things, some people visualize them literally as video. Some people visualize it as an audio thing. Some people can see a painting being painted in front of them when they're trying to think about. So for me, I always think in that sort of audioscape.
Okay.
And I'm not an audio engineer, so I wouldn't know like super
I mean,
technical stuff. I just know how things should sound.
Okay.
You should see some of the feedback I send my editors or engineers. I'll be like, can you bring the vocals forward and push the guitars back and bring the levels up here? But it's just that they understand how I speak and they get where I'm coming from. And if they have any doubts, they will give me samples. They're like, okay, we're doing it this way. So I have some knowledge
Okay.
of audio. I may not be an engineer though. I've not studied
No,
that.
I think that was not needed. But I can open.
Which is why I work with people who are
I can
audio
open
engineers.
GarageBand and I call myself an audio engineer now. Just kidding. Well, all right. So now, like at a time like that, it seems like each project had each podcast had quite a few people working on it. Is that right? And
Usually,
I want to ask you, like, is that needed also?
well, yeah. I mean, especially if you're running a company. So if what would happen is that you would have obviously the host, who mainly is kind of in charge of content. You would have a producer who's working with that host, who either does research, who does a lot of coordination with the guest or the studio.
So the
or-
producer is the one who's like setting things up together.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they will also help the host with content if need be.
Okay.
They help with the editing process, the production process, basically. They're kind of like how you would have in TV, like I guess like a line producer. Yeah. And
Okay.
so what would happen is they're in charge of the show. Then you would have your audio engineer who's recording it. You'd have your editor who's doing all the post work on it. And then you'd have maybe a technical person who will help upload the files onto your RSS feed, basically.
Yeah, I totally understand that it's a lot of work, but I just wanted to see like what are the roles in the podcasting industry. Now, supposing people don't want to start a podcast, but there seems to be another opportunity called a producer who could who is a
But it's
hustler
very
and-
different
yeah.
from like the TV and film producers.
Okay.
Those are the guys that are obviously seeking out money and financial investment. So a producer in a podcast space is very different. They're basically, even in the radio industry, is very similar. So it's basically the person who assists you on the show.
Okay.
And they handle all the editing, all the production stuff. They do all the coordination, that kind of thing. So that's their job. And it's the same in radio as it is in podcasting. So you have a
Okay.
producer who'll be working with you, who assists you.
So that's a
basically.
pre-existing career option.
Yeah, very
Okay.
much. And obviously, as editors or recording engineers, that's another one. And tech side of things, I don't know. Like I actually know very few tech people who actually work in this space. But they basically handle all the RSS feed uploads. They make sure all the files are proper. They coordinate with the producers to make sure everything comes to them on time. I guess that's just on a very basic level. Depending on the kind of show that you're doing, then that will change. So if you're doing something that's fiction based, you might need a scriptwriter. If you're doing something where you're making music, you might actually need someone who creates music, like a composer or something. If you are working on, say, doing like a documentary style kind of show, then you might need a researcher. So depending on what kind of show that you're making, you think about it as you would like a film or a TV show or a TV documentary. There's like an entire team that's in charge of that
Okay.
particular production. In that same way, you would have, like I said, your researcher, your sound design guy, your recordist. Like, so all these people are part of what you are building for that production.
Okay, cool. So now, I'm like, you've been podcasting for so long, right? I'm sure people come to you with questions about podcast.
Yeah, so many questions.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of them.
no. I mean, what is the
I'll do
most
my best.
what is the most common advice you find you keep giving people on podcasting?
Oh my god! So I ended up doing a lot of like press interviews this year, and one question that always comes up is, what are the things that I should think about when I start my podcast? So
In terms of
so if you decide to start your podcast, what was your advice to people? So my usual advice to anyone who's starting a podcast is super simple. Number one, make sure that you like talk to people about your idea. Like see, if you think that it's a good idea. Some
Okay.
people might be able to contribute to that and tell you that, hey, that might work, this might not work. So test out what your idea is.
So just with the idea itself, play around
just talk
before
to people.
you
I
even...
have this idea of doing this show. What do you think? Obviously, people are close to you who will give you the best judgment. And
Yeah.
so I think just if you can describe your idea in like one line, that would be amazing. Like I recently discovered a podcast that I'm listening to called Masala Jones.
Okay.
And it is about, it's so funny. It's basically about this Asian American guy who I think is like either a chartered accountant or a techie, and he wants to become a porn star.
Oh,
so
wow.
the whole podcast
I
is
should
about
listen to
that.
that.
It's a fiction show.
Okay,
Of course.
okay.
So it's like, and in one line I'm telling you that, and you're like, that sounds amazing. How am I not listening to this?
How many episodes is it?
I can't remember. I think there must be about 8
10 or something.
episodes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
I can tell you that one idea, and then you are already hooked. So figure out what that idea is that you feel is unique, either unique to you or unique like in this, in this country. Another thing that is super important is doing a pilot for your show.
Okay.
Now, you don't have to be super snazzy audio. Like, that's not the issue. If you have I think one of the best audio recording on your phone, which is Apple, but you can use any of them. I think Android phone is fine too. So if you have a show that you want to record, just record it. Like,
Okay.
my thing is go and do it.
Okay.
You won't actually understand the level of either effort it's going to take for you. You won't understand what you will need, what your trouble or your problems are, and how to troubleshoot them. None of those things are going to make any sense to you till you actually do the recording and hear it back. One of the things is you might think that you either sound amazing, or you might think that I'll be able to do this and it'll be awesome. And then when you hear yourself back, you go, this sounds like
I know what you're talking about.
rubbish. I always tell people, editing is your best friend.
Okay.
Don't assume that when you're making a show that you just ramble on and on. Edit it down. Like, if you think that, like, be
Hello,
brutal,
Dak Shepard. Please listen to this. Yeah.
just, you'll have, it doesn't even matter. Like, someone like Joe Rogan, who's like the biggest podcast in the world.
It's
It's
real
just
boring.
3 hours. I mean, it depends. A lot of people love the guy and really like his podcast.
No,
I used to
Joe
listen
Rogan's
to
awesome, but a lot of these popular, super long podcasts are like, oh my god.
But people listen to them.
True.
You're
I
not a
agree.
popular podcast for no reason at all.
Yeah.
So my thing is that I always say this: editing is your best friend. I'm not saying that you need to do only short format audio, but I'm just saying that if you can cut out all the, ancillary bits that you just feel like this doesn't need to be there. This is the real core of where the show is. And come up with fun stuff. Like, take advantage of like the medium in whatever way that you can. I always feel like unless you try what you're doing, you will never be able to figure out either how much time it'll take you, what resources you'll need, as well as just how much money it might cost you to do it.
Yeah, awesome. I just want to pitch in on that. So what I did, like, there's an app called Anchor. If you're looking into podcasting, you're going to discover it first. So Anchor allows you this audio recording platform right in the phone, with some basic editing through the web as well. But what I did is just recorded an interview with my friend, and as you said, heard it back, and that itself kind of put me a few steps ahead in terms of what to expect in the journey, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So when you test it out, then you realize that, oh, maybe I should do this, or maybe I should. Even something as basic as, I think one of the things that I've had, and you're a pretty decent interviewer. I've had people interview me who on podcasts who have no idea how to have a conversation.
Okay.
And it's, it is one of those things where you don't feel like it flows well. You kind of feel a little bit awkward. And I'm a natural, like I talk for a living.
Yes.
It's like that. But I think that you'll be able to hear how you are and genuinely be able to understand maybe what you need to change, what you need to do. And not everyone has to host the show. I think it also is that there's so much more stuff that's happening in the background that you don't even realize.
Yeah, okay.
I also find podcasting amazing because you feel like you have a voice. And I think that's what's sort of fascinating about it, that it's you, your story, other people's stories. That's what's exciting.
Awesome. So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, about the personality, or like about a podcaster. Can anybody become a podcaster, and like,
I think,
or what skills do you need at the very least?
I think this is a really tough one, because a lot of people would say to me that, oh, I don't have a voice for like radio. And I agree with you. Most radio jocks, you need to have a voice because you're talking for a very limited period of time. But with podcasting, the quality of your voice doesn't matter so much. What matters is your content. So what you're saying, how you're saying it, how you're designing the show, all of that makes a huge difference. So it's a real concentration on what is being said. Like an RJ can talk absolute air, like just for 2 minutes, and then a song will play. But then when you're doing a podcast, one of the things you realize is that it's truly the content that is king on a podcast. So it is genuinely about what you have to say. That's why, like, I mean, I've been, whatever interview that I do, wherever that I'm going, one of the things that I'm unafraid of doing is that I have a script. I have my questions written down.
Okay.
I'm extremely well prepared. A lot of people don't need that. A lot of my friends who are radio presenters and hosts don't need that. It's all up there in their head and their memory. But for me, I have a terrible memory, and I know what my, shortfalls are. So then I will do my best to make sure that I'm able to do the best possible show. So I'll make sure that at least all the things that I need to make me feel secure are there as well. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna. It's got a 30 minutes limit. Hey, while I adjust the camera over there, I just want to quickly jump in and ask a couple of things from you. First of all, what's your job, and what is it that you like and don't like about your job? Please let me know in the comments. And second, I have a hashtag called hashtag Salman Needs A Job, which is the name of this podcast. I want to have some fun with it. So if you're active on LinkedIn, could you use this hashtag on your LinkedIn post? I want to start aggregating some work-related content on this hashtag. That's it basically. I hope you're enjoying this video. Mae Thomas is awesome. All right. Now I want to ask you about the research, right? Like you just said what I had in mind. Some people don't do much of it, don't have their questions prepared, and some people script it out. So like for you, like how much time do you spend on each interview prior to the actual recording?
So I mean now I'm lucky that I have like producers that I work with who are very good researchers, so that the most important thing for me is finding those little nuggets of like unknown things that are there, and all I do is just Google a lot of it. A lot of people say things in interviews that I don't realize. If I know the person very well, or I know his or her friends, then I'll call them and like, hey, I'm doing this interview, can you tell me a little bit about a weird story from when they were kids? And so I've done that before when I've called people for stories, because sometimes not everything is on the internet. I think doing your research and really knowing a person allows them to feel like you've invested in them, that you know who they are, and they are more open to telling you
So it
things.
makes the guests feel more comfortable.
Yeah, also freaks them out because they're like, oh my God, you knew that. Like recently I did an interview with this artist called Ditty, and I said that, hey, I heard that your mom's a botanist. And she's like, how do you know my mom's a botanist? And so, yeah, it's things like that. It's just about knowing who,
Same thing. I heard that in Pakshi, you knew something about the brother of a guy. I'm like, how do you know that? Exactly.
great.
Probably you do way too much research then.
Yeah, I know too much. And it's happened to me before. I think one of the ones that I'm super proud of was I remember with Apache Indian, which I mentioned before. It was like, oh, my 90s childhood coming alive. And when I interviewed him, one of the things that was super fun was that I found out his connection to reggae and Jamaica, which was that he had a Jamaican nanny as a kid, and he grew up speaking patois, and so he understood it and understood the music, which is where his connection, like, why would this Punjabi guy do reggae music?
Okay.
That was his connection in Birmingham. There's this melting pot of cultures and and different countries and
Okay.
different people, different nationalities coming together. And so for him, that was his connection to reggae music. Then I found out that there's going to be a biopic about him, and
Oh,
he's
wow.
like,
This was
it
after
hasn't
the
even
interview?
been.
This is
During
after you interviewed?
No, during
Oh,
the
okay.
interview, I told him I heard there's a biopic being written about you, and
Oh, he didn't know that?
no.
I'm so
Let me
sorry.
if you let me finish my sentence, I
Alright.
promise you I'll tell you the story.
Okay.
So basically, during the interview, I found out that through my research that there was a biopic being written about him. So it's like, hey, I heard there's a biopic about you, and he's like, how do you know? It's not been written yet, so they're commissioning it. Obviously,
Okay.
they'll contact you when they want to write that want to
Okay.
do something about your life. And then I asked him, like, who would you cast as, like, who'd play the young Apache Indian, and like it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So the fact that I knew that and not many people did, it was super fun.
It's awesome because I guess not everybody has access to WikiLeaks like you. You're just kidding.
Like epic WikiLeaks.
Now tell me like about your other podcasts. You have a few other shows as well, and you're consulting on podcasting as well, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I am doing right now is that I obviously have my show Made in India. Last year, I worked with Pooja Dhingra, who's an old friend from my radio days. She just popped me a message on WhatsApp saying, I want to make a podcast, let's do this. And it was amazing. And so we made No Sugar Coat
Okay.
together, which was her vision of her dream of being an Oprah, and I love it. And she wanted to be able to talk to people about their entrepreneurial journey, their struggles. Her whole idea was that she came from this space where everyone said her life was a cakewalk, that everything was a piece of cake,
Okay.
being a pastry chef. So she wanted to sort of bust that, which was what No Sugar Coat was about. She was also on a no sugar diet exactly at that
Okay.
time. And I think for her, it was really nice to open those kitchen doors and make people really see what goes on and how people struggle within the food and hospitality industry. So there was her, and then thanks to her, there was a gynecologist called Dr. Munjal Kapadia, and he came to me, he's like, I want to make a podcast, how do I do this? And that's where we decided to make a women's health show called
Okay.
She Says She's Fine. And the show actually
I just sent it to
about-
my wife yesterday. I
Did
listened to that a
you?
little bit, the AMA, and I know that
Isn't
it's going to be
it
very valuable,
great?
so I just passed it
Everything.
along.
And
yeah.
we've had some great guests. So with She Says She's Fine, the idea actually came out of the fact that Dr. Munjal would do these AMAs on like Twitter and Instagram. And the thing with him...
Yeah, the thing with him.
So with regards to Dr. Munjal's show, what had happened was it kind of was inspired by the fact that he would do these AMAs on Twitter and Instagram. And he would get like some 700, 800 questions from like women all across, not just India, but the world.
Okay.
Asking about their health and the gynecological health. And so that was the moment that I realized, like, how is there nothing in the mainstream about this? And that's how, when I was figuring out the format of the show, initially he wanted to interview his patients, and which was great because they wanted to be open about their journeys. And I felt like that was too intimidating, especially if we got other women on the show. So then that's when I decided to have 2 women on the show. So they would there's a little bit of camaraderie between those 2 women. And then it's hosted and guided by a gynecologist who's the medical professional in the
Okay.
place. So you can ask him questions, he'll explain stuff. And I wanted to be able to cover
Yeah, he's very good
everything.
also, like, in terms as a podcaster, yeah.
So so Dr. Munjal, we wanted to be able to cover everything, which included sex and contraception and motherhood and miscarriages and Honestly, it's amazing because one of the things we discovered on the show, because one of our most popular episode, shockingly enough, is miscarriages. And it's not only because that episode was amazing, because both Pooja and Riddhi, who were on the episode, were so open about something that is such a traumatic situation. But miscarriage is also something that no one talks about. Not even like between a husband and wife, like talk about what's going on.
Okay.
And so I was amazed that episode did so well, but it's also because that conversation was so powerful. And so she says she's fine. We released in February. I'm also
when you just said that name, it's like it was in a flow, like it was part of the sentence.
Yeah.
She said she's fine. Yeah.
So now I'm working with other OTT platforms. I'm working with
OTT is?
over the top. So
Okay,
basically
cool.
streaming platforms, audio
Okay.
streaming platforms. So I'm working with them to make content. I'm working with agencies and production companies who want to start
Okay.
moving into
Podcasting.
podcasting.
Two questions. Very limited time we have left. So, like, is there an interest in podcasting in media, in the media, mainstream media? And second, can podcasting be a full-time career?
I think it can. I think right now, I mean, one of the most important things right now is there are very few players. But I think that if more people get into this, this happened last year. I got asked by a friend's mother who told me that she was basically running a bunch of media courses.
Okay.
And so she wanted me to be a part of that and include podcasting as a course. And I asked her, really, you want me to teach podcasting as like either a vocational or a university course? And she was like, yeah. And she was like, a lot of her students were coming back and telling her that, hey, you know what? This agency I'm working for, this brand I'm working for, everyone's asking me about what is a podcast. Go find out what podcast is and let's make it. And which was exciting for me. And then even
Is
more.
this in Mumbai or something?
Yeah, it's in Bombay. I mean, most of my work here is in Bombay.
Okay.
And then there was another a friend of mine who asked me to come to an agency because he was like, hey, you know, we're getting a lot of brands, a lot of media planners, and all of them are asking us, what is podcasting? What can we do and how do we do it? And so again, I give a talk at an agency to be able to explain to them what podcasting was and how they can use the medium. So I think there's a huge amount of curiosity around the medium and people are exploring it. People are dipping their toes. As a career option, why not? I don't see anything limiting you. I think a lot of the people who are coming into this don't come from an audio background or don't come from a lot of people who I think would be really great for this would be like journalists. Like coming from a journalistic background or research background makes a huge difference. I know now that even some of the editors that I work with are, you know, literally like Netflix quality people because I want to be able to work with great sound designers. So I think that you might have like
there's a lot of talent. As a final question, I just want to ask you, like, see, I'm completely new. I've not even launched the podcast, basically. Just doing rounds of interviews right now. Do you have any feedback for me, like from the experience you've had with me, from like outreach to the interview and all that?
Oh, so I have to say that you are incredibly organized, which is a huge plus point. Also, I like there to be like a little quirk, which is what makes me sort of attracted to something. So if I tell someone a story, then they're like, oh, that's funny. So the name, when I asked you what's the name of your show and you're like, Salman Needs a Job. And I'm like,
awesome.
That's funny, man. I like it.
Cool.
So it's nice just to be playful. I think I enjoy that. And I think with exactly how you gave me like a little brief, you gave me a little outline of what you were going to talk about. You are clearly know what you're doing because you got excellent equipment right in front of me, and I'm so impressed.
Awesome. And that's full of
thumbs
like
up,
approved on my gear.
Approved on the gear. Because yeah, I have a Zoom. I don't have an H5. I have I think H1 or H2. I can't remember which one it is, but it's a tinier one. I mean, as a radio person, you just have a recorder automatically all the time. But yeah, this is a really nice one. So I think in general, you are extremely professional and very respectful. Also of like me and my time, and Yeah, and then even when you came here and set up, I was like, this
Okay,
guy
that is so
knows
great
his
to
stuffs.
hear. Thank you so much. That makes me feel so good.
Yeah.
Now, tell me, like, where can people find out about you and what
Oh.
should people expect of your content?
Oh my God, so I got more shows coming out towards the end of this year and hopefully next year. I am, it's super simple. I would like for anyone to get in touch with me. Please do. My handle on Twitter is at maybe. That's Maebe. And on Instagram, it's Mae Mariam, Maemariym. Of course, Made in India, which is MAED at MAED in India. And that is across everything. That's like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram,
Okay,
everywhere.
awesome.
We have a YouTube page as well. So,
And same
yeah.
on the podcast as well, Made in India.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We're on like all podcast apps. You go anywhere and you'll be able to find us.
Fantastic. So lovely speaking to you. I
It's
really
good to
appreciate your
speak
time.
to
Yeah.
you.